They had the nerve to call the police on me for unlocking the front door of my own home. I was standing right there on the porch of my lakeside retreat, keys in hand, staring at a woman I'd never seen before casually live streaming from inside my living room. Meanwhile, the HOA president was spinning a wild tale to the responding officers, accusing me of being some kind of unhinged trespasser. As it turns out, her close friend had already taken up residence in my house for weeks, and just because I came home early from a business trip, I was suddenly the intruder. What I uncovered next about the HOA president and this so-called friend would shake everything I believed about the people I once trusted. Stick around, because this story will change the way you look at neighborhood politics forever. To understand how I ended up in this surreal mess, we have to rewind the clock. It all started 8 months earlier, long before the situation turned toxic. I had filed what I assumed was a routine complaint against our HOA president, Diane Hawthorne. Her choice to paint her house an outrageous neon pink clashed with every design rule in our bylaws. As a guy who works in software and thrives on structure and consistency, that garish paint job drove me up the wall. I thought it would be a simple fix report, the violation, get the color corrected, case closed. I couldn't have been more wrong. The aftermath was brutal. Diane ended up shelling out over $15,000 to completely repaint her house. And the drama didn't stay private. It exploded in front of a full house at a community meeting, where she was openly criticized in front of dozens of residents. I honestly believed I had done something good, something that preserved the integrity and value of our neighborhood. What I didn't realize was that Diane was in serious financial trouble behind the scenes. She was barely keeping her head above water. And my complaint, it didn't just humiliate her, it put me directly in her crosshairs. What Diane did next was nothing short of calculated brilliance. She didn't lash out right away. Instead, she played the long game with chilling precision. Over the next few months, she acted as if everything was fine between us, smiling when we crossed paths, waving politely when I drove past, even complimenting my front garden. I genuinely believed we had put the whole issue behind us and moved on like civilized adults. The entire time, though, she was collecting information about me, tracking my comings and goings, taking mental notes on my work travel, and planning her moment of revenge down to the smallest detail. Diane knew I regularly traveled to Seattle for work, usually staying a week at a time for meetings. She also knew my property sat isolated at the far end of our street, where no one would bat an eye if something looked out of place. But here's the part that still makes my skin crawl. Long before I had any clue what was happening, Diane had been training someone to carry out her plan. Her name was Stephanie Wilson, newly divorced, struggling with debt, and emotionally vulnerable. Stephanie had been led to believe this was some kind of mission to support women in distress. Diane sold it to her as a righteous cause. But in reality, it was the opening move in a twisted scheme that would wreck everything I thought I knew about justice and community. What they pulled off was disturbingly elaborate and frightening in how calculated it was. Diane had somehow persuaded Stephanie that she was spearheading a network of hidden shelters for survivors of domestic abuse and that my cabin, usually unoccupied, was the perfect site for one. They crafted an entire narrative from scratch. Stephanie was allegedly on the run from a violent ex-spouse, trying to rebuild her life in a safe, quiet place. Diane, meanwhile, played the role of the compassionate community leader, lending a hand. Their scheme wasn't just clever, it was disturbingly thorough. They produced photo evidence of Stephanie with what looked like realistic bruises, forged police reports detailing past altercations, made up records from fake therapy sessions, chronicling her supposed emotional healing, and even bogus hospital documents noting physical injuries. They'd thought through almost every angle, except for one twist they didn't see coming. My meeting in Seattle got called off because of a family emergency on the client's side, which meant I headed back home 5 days earlier than I'd planned. I was looking forward to some quiet time at the cabin, maybe working on a few personal things and enjoying some solitude. But as soon as I pulled up the driveway, I felt like I'd stepped into a distorted version of my own life. My cabin, my personal retreat that I'd saved for and built with pride, looked like it had been claimed by someone else entirely. The windows now had curtains I'd never bought, and the furniture I could see inside wasn't mine. Potted plants lined the porch, ones I definitely didn't recognize. And sitting right there in the driveway was a car I had never seen before, like it belonged there. But the moment that truly sent my head spinning came when I looked through the living room window and saw Stephanie Wilson casually live streaming to social media inside my cabin. She was giving what sounded like a virtual tour, talking about the cozy reading corner and the sweet little kitchen where she claimed to make coffee each morning. She spoke as though the place was hers, as if she'd been living there for years. The longer I looked, the more surreal it became. I checked my mailbox and found utility bills addressed to Stephanie Wilson at my address. Through the front window, I saw framed photos of her on the mantel, where my family photos had once sat. Her clothes were hanging in my closet, her groceries were stocked in my fridge. This wasn't someone staying for a night or two. She had completely moved in, treating the place like it was legally hers. I stood frozen, trying to make sense of what I was witnessing until Stephanie turned. saw me watching from outside, and her entire expression changed in an instant, like a stage performer dropping the mask between scenes. Every angle had been calculated, every detail covered, except one. A single unexpected event unraveled their entire plan. One of my Seattle business clients had a sudden family emergency and canceled our meeting, which left me with an open calendar. I figured I'd take advantage of the free time and spend a few quiet days up at the cabin, maybe catch up on reading, or work on my old woodworking project. But when I pulled into the driveway, something felt off, like I had stepped into someone else's life. My private retreat, the place I had saved for and maintained with pride, looked like it belonged to a stranger. There were unfamiliar curtains in the windows, furniture I didn't recognize peeking through the glass, and potted plants on the porch that I'd never seen before. A car I didn't own was parked in my usual spot like it belonged there. Then came the moment that truly spun my head. I peeked through the living room window and saw Stephanie Wilson, broadcasting live on social media. She was giving her followers a home tour, casually showing off what she called her cabin, pointing out the cozy reading corner, and even describing the kitchen where she brewed her morning coffee. It was like watching someone narrate my own life, but in her voice. I walked over to the mailbox and found utility bills addressed to Stephanie Wilson with my address on them. I moved toward the front door and stared through the glass, stunned to see framed photos of her and what looked like her family on my mantel. Her clothes filled my closet. Her groceries were in my fridge. This wasn't a squatter hiding out for a weekend. This was a person who had completely moved in and made herself at home in my space. I was still standing there, trying to make sense of it all, when Stephanie looked up and spotted me through the window. What happened next was surreal. One moment she was smiling and relaxed, waving at her viewers during her live. The very next moment, she dropped the phone and screamed like she'd seen a ghost. Her voice cracked with terror as she pointed at me like I was some violent intruder. She grabbed her phone again and made a frantic call. And just like that, the show began. Diane came charging up the street minutes later, in what looked like a Halloween version of a first responder uniform, complete with a DIY vest that read crisis response, fake patches, and a clipboard for extra effect. She stormed up between me and the front door like she was leading a disaster drill. Without hesitation, Diane whipped out her phone and called the police, barking into the line with theatrical urgency. "We need immediate assistance at 247 Lake View Drive. There's a domestic violence victim being threatened by her abuser. He's here now." I tried to interrupt, to explain that I owned the cabin and had never seen these women in my life. But Diane raised her voice each time I spoke, practically shouting over me as Stephanie cried loudly in the background, playing her role to perfection. I honestly believed that once the police arrived and saw my documents, this would be sorted out in minutes. Officer Williams was the first on the scene. I confidently handed him my ID, the deed to the cabin, and mortgage paperwork, everything showing I was the legal owner. But Diane was ready. She launched into a rehearsed performance, laying out her own file of evidence that painted me as a mentally unstable neighbor with a known history of harassing women. She showed Officer Williams HOA complaints I'd filed in the past, twisting them into proof of my vendetta against strong female leaders. She claimed Stephanie had lived there for weeks, got her mail there, paid for utilities, and was known by locals, including the pharmacist down the street. To an outsider like Officer Williams, it genuinely looked like I was some deranged man trying to evict a terrified woman from her rightful home. And then Diane delivered the final blow. Stephanie had clearly been coached to perfection. She rattled off the name of a local coffee shop she claimed to frequent, talked about a hiking trail she loved for clearing her mind, and mentioned a grocery store clerk who always asked about her day. These weren't vague claims. They were strategic, highly specific references designed to make her feel like a real member of the community. And for the officer standing there, that level of detail sealed it. The scheme they pulled off was disturbingly sophisticated, both in its execution and in what it implied. Diane had somehow persuaded Stephanie that she was setting up a network of refuge homes for survivors of domestic abuse. And my cabin, often empty, was the perfect hideout. They spun a complete narrative from scratch. According to their story, Stephanie was running from a violent ex-spouse. She needed shelter to rebuild her life, and Diane, ever the supposed Doug-Ooter, was her savior. The fake documentation they manufactured was impressively thorough. There were staged photos of Stephanie sporting hyper-realistic makeup bruises, fabricated police complaints from alleged past incidents, fictional therapy records detailing her healing journey, and even forged hospital documents citing injury from abuse. They covered every angle except for one critical oversight that would eventually be their downfall. A sudden change in my schedule flipped their whole illusion upside down. A client meeting I had lined up in Seattle got called off because of a family emergency on their side. So, I hit the road and came home nearly a week earlier than planned. I was looking forward to some downtime, maybe tackling a few long-postponed personal tasks. But the moment I pulled into my driveway, it felt like I had stumbled into someone else's story. My quiet cabin, my pride and joy, the place I worked so hard to call mine, looked completely different. New drapes hung in the windows, unfamiliar. Furniture peeked out from inside. There were plants I'd never seen before, and a strange car sat parked like it belonged there. But none of that compared to what I saw next. Through my living room window, I caught a glimpse of Stephanie Wilson, casually live streaming a virtual home tour of my house. She was describing the cozy corner where I read each morning, the kitchen I used for my daily coffee ritual, as if it were her own place and her own story to tell. She had taken over my home so fully, it was like watching a stranger narrate my life. I was frozen in place. It didn't feel real. I checked the mailbox, still trying to make sense of things, and there, it was utility bills made out in Stephanie's name, using my address. As I stepped closer to the front door, I saw through the window what confirmed my worst fears. My mantelpiece displayed photos of her clothes filled my closet, and my fridge was packed with her groceries. This wasn't someone squatting for a weekend. This woman had completely taken over and settled into my home as if it were hers all along. I just stood there, stunned, struggling to process how deeply she had embedded herself into my life. And that's when she noticed me. Stephanie looked up from inside and saw me standing outside the window. What happened to her face in that instant was almost cinematic. Her expression shifted like a seasoned actress flipping roles mid-scene. The whole setup, Diane orchestrated, was disturbingly clever and deeply unsettling. She had fed Stephanie a detailed story about how she was coordinating a shelter network for survivors of domestic abuse. According to her, my cabin was ideal since I supposedly never used it. Stephanie was led to believe she'd found a safe haven. In the story, Diane spun. Stephanie was escaping an abusive husband and needed a quiet place to heal in. Diane, the selfless neighbor, was simply helping her rebuild her life. They didn't just stop at a verbal tale. No, they created an elaborate fiction with every supporting detail meticulously crafted. There were photos of Stephanie sporting expertly applied makeup that mimicked bruises. There were fake police statements outlining past incidents, false therapy notes detailing her emotional recovery, and even fabricated hospital documents listing injuries. Every piece of evidence looked legitimate. The only flaw in their plan was one minor detail they never accounted for, a detail that would eventually unravel their entire scheme. My return wasn't supposed to happen when it did. A client meeting in Seattle was abruptly canceled due to a family emergency on their side, and rather than stick around, I decided to head back home. I thought I'd enjoy some solitude, catch up on reading, maybe finish that woodworking project I'd been putting off. But as I pulled into my driveway 5 days earlier than scheduled, something felt off. It was as if I'd arrived at a stranger's house rather than my own retreat. In the woods, the first thing I noticed was the windows. New drapes I didn't recognize, different furniture visible inside, and a variety of potted plants neatly arranged along the porch. A car I'd never seen before was parked in my spot, like it belonged. There it was unsettling, like walking into a dream where everything is slightly wrong. But the real gut punch came when I glanced through the living room window. There she was, Stephanie, streaming live on social media, smiling as she gave a virtual house tour. My house. She described her cozy reading corner and the cute little kitchen where she made breakfast every morning. Every room she showcased was mine, filled with my memories and personal touches, but presented as hers. The confidence in her voice made it clear she wasn't just visiting, she was presenting herself as the rightful occupant. I walked over to my mailbox in disbelief, only to find utility bills addressed to her name, using my address. I approached the door and peered through the glass. Her pictures were hanging above my fireplace. Her clothes filled my closet. Her groceries were packed in my fridge. This wasn't someone squatting for a few nights. She had fully moved in and replaced me, piece by piece, as if I had never existed. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. That's when she noticed me. Our eyes met through the window, and the change in her expression was immediate, like someone flipping a switch. The pleasant, camera-ready smile vanished, and something colder, more calculating, took its place. That's when I knew this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a premeditated invasion. I bumped into Robert at the local grocery store. He was a retired detective with over 2 decades of experience, and he had this uncanny ability to read people. One look, and he felt like he already knew what you were hiding. He leaned in, voice low. "This whole thing feels off," he said, glancing around cautiously. "I worked real domestic abuse cases for 30 years. There are patterns, this doesn't match them." The fact that Officer Williams took Robert's opinion seriously changed everything. It meant someone within the system was finally questioning what was happening. Robert then shared something chilling, a nearly identical case involving his friend Kevin Morrison. Just a year ago, Kevin lost his $200,000 cabin to a similar scheme. According to Robert, Kevin had gone out of town, and by the time he came back, a woman claiming to be fleeing abuse had taken over his cabin. She filed legal claims, and before Kevin could fight it properly, the legal maze bled him dry. He lost his home and ended up in a tiny apartment across town. That story hit me hard, but it was what Robert discovered next that truly floored me. Robert dug into the past 48 hours like he was back on the force. What he uncovered sent a chill down my spine. Kevin's situation wasn't unique. In fact, there were 3 more cases in our county that followed the same script. Every time, It was a woman who claimed abuse, slipped into someone's home while they were away, and leveraged the legal system to stay driving the rightful owner out with fake charges and legal intimidation. But then came the most horrifying discovery. Robert found photos, dozens of them. The same woman kept showing up. Angela Thompson, different properties, different fabricated stories, but always her. It was like she was a professional con artist, moving from place to place, stealing homes. With fake trauma as her weapon of choice, Angela wasn't acting alone either. Robert's evidence showed she was training others, literally coaching them in how to pull off the deception. He had screenshots of her teaching makeup tricks for fake bruises, practicing fake trembling in front of a mirror, even scripting fake breakdowns. She'd turned manipulation into an enterprise, raking in tens of thousands for every house she helped steal. In picture after picture, Angela was there, different outfits, different wigs, but always that same cold expression, and always posing like she owned the place. This wasn't petty theft. It was a full-blown criminal ring stealing millions of dollars worth of homes from hardworking families. I was stunned, but I also knew we couldn't stop now. The more we uncovered, the more desperate Diane became to shut us down. She filed harassment complaints against me, accusing me of organizing some sort of movement to bully and silence abuse victims. Then she handed over doctored footage from a street cam that twisted my evidence collecting into something it wasn't, trying to paint me as a stalker. But what Diane didn't expect was how much pressure Stephanie was under. Robert picked up on it first. He noticed how she hesitated during her usual online attacks. She'd start writing a post, delete it, then rewrite it. Even in her videos, her posture was shifting, less confident, more nervous. Something was cracking. Guilt, doubt, or maybe just the fatigue of living a lie. Then, the entire scheme started unraveling. Stephanie accidentally went live on social media during a prep session with Diane. The stream wasn't meant to be public, but it was, and the audio was crystal clear. Diane was coaching her line by line. Remember to act scared if anyone's around, she said. Say you feel unsafe, and make sure to suggest he could get violent. The live comments lit up instantly. Is this a setup? Someone typed. Why does it sound like a script? Asked another. This is staged, isn't it? Added a third. Stephanie realized the disaster too late and killed the stream, but the damage was done. Several viewers had already screen recorded the entire thing that night. Robert showed me the saved clips. For the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: hope. Maybe now, the truth could come out. But will this accidental live stream be enough to blow the whole thing wide open? Or will the people behind this scam silence the witnesses before justice has a chance to breathe? Let me know what you think. Timeless Walks viewers, this is far from over. What was I supposed to do with the kind of evidence I had uncovered? The days that followed felt like watching someone slowly peel away from a delusion, and that someone was Stephanie. Robert, ever the observant neighbor, played the part of a curious but neutral friend. His casual approach gave him access to conversations and behaviors I could never observe firsthand. He began picking up on subtle things: how Stephanie hesitated before answering certain questions, how uncomfortable she looked when neighbors called her courageous, and how she sometimes stumbled when recounting the very story she was supposed to be living. The first significant crack appeared when Stephanie happened to overhear Diane on a phone call, mentioning that the Wilson operation was progressing ahead of schedule. The word operation lodged itself in Stephanie's mind, like a needle. Why call helping a friend an operation? And what schedule were they supposedly on? The deeper she thought, the more questions surfaced. And the polished story Diane had fed her began to erode. You could see the shift publicly too. Stephanie's once fiery, self-assured social media presence began to flicker. The rants were replaced by vague, reflective posts. Her live streams, once frequent and emphatic, were now rare and strained. When she did appear, the spark in her eyes was gone, replaced by exhaustion and confusion. Robert told me she'd started asking quiet, indirect questions. Things like how long domestic violence cases typically lasted, or what the law said about making false reports. She never said why she wanted to, no, but it was obvious. The reality was dawning on her. Maybe Diane hadn't told her everything. Maybe she'd been dragged into something far more dangerous than she realized. That at the same time, I was diving deep into the digital trail. With my tech background, I started piecing together a precise timeline using metadata, timestamps, and inconsistencies across Stephanie's posts. The picture that formed showed a story falling apart under even the slightest scrutiny. Meanwhile, Robert was uncovering some disturbing truths of his own. He had tracked down the full history of Angela Thompson, a name I'd barely registered. Before, her record read like a criminal portfolio. Angela had been involved in over a dozen staged housing scams in just the last few years, always acting as the trainer, guiding others on how to impersonate domestic abuse victims convincingly. She was earning thousands every month, plus free housing just for acting out fake trauma. Angela had perfected the art of deception, from applying realistic-looking bruises to producing tears on cue, and even manipulating police officers with rehearsed emotional displays. She had turned fraud into a science. But what chilled us both was discovering that she had actual written training guides, step-by-step instructions for how to behave under questioning, maintain victim credibility, and push public sympathy through social media. It was manipulation. The real turning point came when Stephanie accidentally found Diane's hidden notebook tucked away in a kitchen drawer. Inside, it read like a script, literally. Detailed instructions on how to behave when the property owner arrived, what to say to the police to ensure full protection, and even advice on how to build online support by faking trauma for social media engagement. When Stephanie realized her entire emotional journey, every panic attack, every tear, every shaky livestream had been engineered by Diane's plan, something inside her shattered. For the first time in this entire ordeal, she cried in this time. The tears were genuine, tears of guilt, of horror, and of deep remorse. But the most horrifying moment came next. Stephanie discovered marketing materials reel, printed brochures, featuring her face, her testimonial, and a glowing endorsement of her success in securing emergency housing. Diane wasn't just stealing my property, she was using Stephanie's image to market her criminal services to other potential fraudsters. Those glossy brochures dressed up the entire scam as a kind of humanitarian effort. Terms like community defense and victim advocacy were plastered everywhere. Stephanie's face was the brand of this criminal ring, and she hadn't even known when she saw those flyers. Collapsed. Robert said she had a full emotional breakdown, but this time, it wasn't part of a performance. The grief was real. The fear was real. The shame was unbearable. As Stephanie was reckoning with the damage done, Robert and I were starting to unravel the business side of Diane's operation. Public property records revealed a chilling pattern. Every domestic abuse claim in our county over the last 5 years was followed by a fast sale, and the buyers always shell companies, always for suspiciously low prices. They were flipping properties within 6 to 12 months, making massive profits. We uncovered undeniable proof of $2.3 million worth of shady transactions, all linked to homes where domestic violence reports had been filed. But the most disturbing part wasn't just the fraud, it was the system that protected it. There were documented payments to judges and police officers, the very people meant to safeguard victims. Instead, they were enabling a coordinated property theft ring. Robert's insider knowledge from his time in law enforcement revealed just how deep this went. Judges were allegedly accepting bribes in the tens of thousands to approve restraining orders without proper hearings. Some police officers were deliberately ignoring conflicting evidence or botching investigations. City council members were greenlighting questionable property transfers without even blinking. This wasn't just scattered corruption. This was a well-oiled criminal machine that had sunk its claws into the entire local justice system. Robert knew the case had to be escalated to the federal level, but we had to tread carefully. We didn't know who we could trust. Eventually, Robert made contact with Stephanie through a mutual neighbor. He offered her full immunity in exchange for her help. She was terrified but saw no other way out. She agreed to wear a wire and record her conversations with Diane, but you could see it in her posture. She knew she was risking everything. If Diane ever found out, it could end very badly. What Stephanie captured over the next few days was beyond anything we had imagined. Diane casually admitted to operating in 3 different states and stealing 47 properties over 5 years. She even ran training camps where she taught women how to fake injuries using makeup and rehearsed fake abuse stories to withstand police questioning. She had built an entire playbook of deception. One particular recording still makes me feel sick. Diane spoke about victims like me with cold indifference. These rich men hoard property while women are homeless, she said. They deserve to lose everything. If they're too dumb to protect it, that's on them. But what finally broke Stephanie's resolve was when Diane shared her next plan. She wanted to frame me for physically assaulting Stephanie. She planned to have Stephanie walk into a police station, covered in fresh bruises, and accuse me of breaking the restraining order. That's when Stephanie made the boldest choice of her life. Pretending she was heading out to run errands, she instead drove straight to the nearest FBI office. She turned over hours of recordings, stacks of financial records, and gave a full confession. She exposed everything. The coaching, the fake claims, the real estate theft, and the corrupted officials. An FBI agent later told me he was stunned. What began as a cabin ownership dispute had turned into one of the most elaborate fraud rings his team had ever uncovered. Within hours, calls went out across multiple field offices, the scale of the operation crossing state lines, involving government officials, and stealing millions meant the FBI was all in. Stephanie had handed them a goldmine of evidence, but she didn't know what Diane had planned next. She had one last move, a final card that could ruin them both. When Special Agent Rivera from the Organized Crime Division saw the evidence, he realized this wasn't just serious, it was massive. The crimes stretched across states, involved millions, and implicated people in high positions of power. The FBI moved fast. With Stephanie's wire recordings, the financial documents, and proof of official corruption, they secured federal warrants. Within 48 hours, 4 coordinated raids across 3 states. But Diane wasn't going down without a fight. Diane wasn't about to go down quietly. The moment she caught wind that federal agents were asking questions around the neighborhood, she spiraled into full-blown panic. She began erasing digital trails, shutting down shady operations, and cutting ties with anyone who could possibly testify. Things escalated when she threatened Stephanie directly during what was meant to be their final meeting. "If I'm going down, you are too," Diane hissed. "You've been part of this from day one, and I have the proof." But her most disturbing move was a sinister setup that would have ruined both Stephanie and me for good. Diane hired a masked man to physically assault Stephanie in public and plant my wallet at the scene, making it look like I had finally lost control and attacked her. The injuries would have been real, giving weight to every accusation she had thrown at me. It was cruel, calculated, and showed just how far Diane would go to preserve her criminal empire. When Stephanie learned about the plan, she was horrified. Diane wasn't protecting women or fighting injustice. She was a dangerous manipulator willing to destroy anyone, even her allies. That moment shattered the last of Stephanie's loyalty. She reached out to her FBI contact and exposed the entire plan, giving agents the intel they needed to stop the attack and tie Diane directly to the would-be assailant. Meanwhile, Robert's network of retired cops had been monitoring Diane's every move. They tracked her visits to a storage unit packed with incriminating documents, watched her hold secret meetings with shady associates, and saw her trying to reach out to corrupt officials she had previously bribed, clearly trying to get the heat off her back. All of this surveillance footage was handed over to Agent Rivera's team, strengthening the case against Diane and her entire operation. Then came another brick, Angela Thompson. She tried to flee the country with over $200,000 in cash, but TSA flagged her. Her usual teary-eyed victim act didn't fool federal security. When they checked her ID, she came up as a person of interest. Within minutes, she was in custody, facing serious federal charges. Angela cracked. She confessed everything, every scam, every stolen property, every partner in crime. Her testimony exposed the full scale of Diane's operation, which spanned across 3 states and involved manipulating entire communities. She even detailed how they trained their recruits fake injury makeup, emotional manipulation, and staged abuse, all designed to win public sympathy. This wasn't just fraud, it was organized crime. The feds now had enough evidence to pursue a major racketeering case. Diane's empire was finally collapsing. Authorities didn't just uncover millions of dollars in stolen properties, they stumbled upon something far more explosive, the entire bribery engine that had powered Diane's criminal empire. There were judges who had accepted payments to rush through restraining orders, cops who were conveniently blind to key evidence, city officials rubber-stamping shady property deals, and even federal workers leaking sensitive information about ongoing investigations. The scale of the corruption was so massive that Agent Rivera had no choice but to call in a high-level task force from the Justice Department's Public Integrity Section. To dismantle this network, they had to coordinate a near-impossible mission, simultaneous raids across 3 different states. It played out like a scene from a high-stakes crime thriller. At the exact same moment, federal teams hit 47 properties to stop Diane's people from fleeing or shredding evidence. A total of 23 individuals were named as direct conspirators, including law enforcement officers and judges whose cooperation had been crucial to Diane's success. The operation required seamless coordination between multiple FBI divisions, trustworthy local law enforcement units, and prosecutors who could handle multi-state racketeering charges with precision. Everything had to be airtight, not even a whisper of the plan could leak. Because Diane still had people on the inside who'd warn her in a heartbeat, and yet, Diane's instincts were razor-sharp. She sensed the noose tightening and launched one final audacious move. She began holding community rallies, claiming that Stephanie was being persecuted by corrupt federal agents, painting herself and Stephanie as heroes under attack by a broken justice system. She reached out to her web of bribed officials, pleading with them to help kill the investigation before it brought her empire crashing down. Then came her most shocking stunt, equal parts genius and madness. She barricaded herself inside my cabin with Stephanie and took to social media, live streaming her side of the story. She claimed the feds were trying to silence 2 innocent women fighting for abused victims. Thousands tuned in. Her voice trembled with false righteousness as she ranted live, not knowing every word was being recorded and cataloged by the FBI as evidence. The standoff lasted 6 tense hours. Armed agents surrounded the cabin while Diane clung to the belief she could twist the narrative one last time. It was Stephanie.com, exhausted and done with the lies, who finally talked her down. Diane stepped out in handcuffs, ranting about conspiracies, while her live stream showed the world her dramatic fall in real time. With all that evidence, you'd think the case would be open and shut. But what came next shocked even the most seasoned agents. At the federal courthouse, the scene was chaos. News crews from every major outlet had swarmed the area. Court TV set up a full studio. Netflix had documentary cameras rolling. Public interest had exploded because the case hit a nerve. It exposed just how icily corrupt officials could weaponize the legal system against ordinary homeowners, but the fame came with danger. Stephanie received multiple death threats from fringe groups who accused her of betraying the cause. Federal marshals had to place her under round-the-clock protection. To some radicals, Diane had become a symbol, a rebel fighting the so-called patriarchal property system. When the prosecution laid out their case, it was staggering. Over 500 pieces of evidence, testimonies from 47 victims, bank records proving $2.3 million in fraud, but nothing hit harder than Diane's own words. The courtroom went silent as her recorded conversations played hour after hour of her bragging about rigging the system, manipulating officials, and crushing families to turn a profit. Diane's voice echoed through the still courtroom, her tone cold and unapologetic. "Wealthy men deserve to lose everything," she declared. "If they can't even safeguard their own assets, that's just nature weeding out the weak." When Stephanie finally stepped onto the witness stand, a hush swept over the room. The silence was so complete, you could hear the creak of a chair or the soft breath of a juror. Everyone listened intently as she described how months of intense manipulation had turned her from a struggling woman into a convincing, weaponized actor. She recounted how Diane had coached her how to apply makeup that resembled real bruises, how to cry on cue, and how to look terrified on demand. She even had a set of scripts for various interactions, whether with the police, neighbors, or court officials. "I lost who I was," Stephanie admitted, her tears finally real, unlike the rehearsed ones she'd mastered. "Every emotion I displayed was rehearsed. Every look of fear was planned. And I hurt innocent people because I thought I was part of something righteous." Diane's legal approach was both predictable and maddening. She had dismissed her court-appointed lawyers and chose to represent herself. That gave her full control of the courtroom, which she used to spin a dramatic tale in which she was the target of a vast government takedown. She claimed she had only ever tried to protect homeless women from corrupt property owners and that her actions were noble acts of resistance against wealth hoarders. She painted herself as a victim of elite forces determined to silence her activism. Every statement was tailored to garner pity and avoid blame for what was clearly a highly organized criminal enterprise. Then the prosecution dropped a devastating truth bomb. The FBI had uncovered evidence linking Diane's tactics to over 200 similar property theft cases across the country. Shockingly, Diane wasn't the ringleader, she was just one cog in a sprawling criminal operation. Federal investigators revealed a network of 15 other self-proclaimed HOA queens, all of whom had been running identical scams in lakefront and suburban communities nationwide. They'd all been using the same fraudulent domestic abuse strategy, honed through years of training and trial. The full scope of the operation left the courtroom, reeling more than $50 million in real estate stolen from over 500 unsuspecting families. The criminals were connected through encrypted communication platforms, detailed online courses, and money laundering schemes that allowed them to quietly cash in on stolen homes. What Diane had done in their quiet neighborhood was just one piece of a much larger puzzle, one that had exploited middle-class homeowners on a massive scale. When this revelation hit the courtroom, chaos erupted. Victims gasped. Reporters scribbled furiously. Diane, meanwhile, fell apart. She spiraled into a breakdown right in front of everyone, screaming that the whole thing was fabricated, that she was being framed, and that the FBI had created fake evidence using artificial intelligence. She claimed Stephanie was a government agent sent to infiltrate her life, and insisted Angela's testimony had been coerced under torture. The judge had to eject her from the courtroom, repeatedly due to her outbursts. But each time she returned, she'd lash out with more bizarre accusations and threats toward witnesses. It became painfully obvious to everyone that Diane was no longer grounded in reality. She truly saw herself as the persecuted hero of this story rather than the manipulative fraudster the evidence clearly proved her to be. Her unhinged rants and theatrical breakdowns only strengthened the prosecution's case, painting her as the kind of person who could mastermind a nationwide con with absolute conviction, and the contrast between her chaotic behavior and the quiet, composed testimony of her victims made it impossible for anyone in that courtroom to see her as anything other than exactly what she was: guilty. Stephanie's courtroom confession shattered any last illusion of Diane's innocence. With chilling precision, she detailed every theft, each staged scenario, and the bribes paid to corrupt officials that kept their operation running for years. The jury sat in stunned silence as she presented training manuals from what she called their Domestic Violence Performance Academy. These included injury makeup tutorials, fake incident scripts, and psychological tactics to manipulate police and gain public sympathy. Her deal with prosecutors capped her sentence at 5 years in exchange for full cooperation. But what she exposed was beyond horrifying. It revealed the inner workings of a criminal syndicate hiding in plain sight. When it was finally my turn to address the court, I delivered my victim impact statement. I spoke about the unbearable experience of being falsely labeled a violent threat and forced from the home I built. I talked about the emotional destruction of being defamed across social media, the crushing weight of legal bills, and the betrayal of neighbors who chose greed over decency. But more than anything, I wanted to make clear that this wasn't just about land or money, it was about broken trust. Trust in our neighbors, in our institutions, in the idea that good people are safe. In their homes, Diane and her cronies had weaponized compassion to destroy lives. The jury needed less than 6 hours to return 47 guilty verdicts, including racketeering charges under the Organized Crime Control Act. Judge Harrison delivered a 35-year federal sentence without parole. Diane was ordered to pay $2.8 million in restitution, her assets seized, and her future stripped bare. When the sentence was read aloud, Diane exploded in rage, caught on live television, screaming, "You destroyed a community hero. I was protecting victims while you defended monsters." The footage of her being led away in shackles went viral. Karen Gets Life began trending worldwide. But despite her imprisonment, I knew the end of the trial wasn't the end of the fight. Chapter 6. Final. Justice and a new legacy. Word count. Approximately 256 months after Diane's conviction, my life began to resemble something close to normal again. My name had been fully cleared, and to my surprise, I was being hailed as a national hero for bringing down a massive fraud ring that had hurt so many families. I received $500,000 in damages, plus full reimbursement for every legal cost. My cabin's value more than doubled due to the media spotlight, and the neighborhood itself had been rebranded as a case study in HOA reform, a place where justice had prevailed. But the biggest transformation wasn't financial, it was personal. For the first time in my life, I had purpose. I began traveling to speak at national conferences, sharing my story to warn others about HOA abuse and property scams. I even helped lawmakers draft new laws to better protect homeowners from corrupt organizations. The speaking gigs alone brought in over $200,000 a year, but the true reward came in handwritten letters from people who had avoided becoming victims because they heard my story. Stephanie's path to redemption was just as inspiring. Even though her immunity deal kept her out of prison, she voluntarily completed 500 hours of community service, helping real domestic violence victims. She later returned to school, became a licensed therapist, and focused her career on helping survivors of psychological abuse. She eventually married a social worker she met during her service work, and together they built a life rooted in healing and hope. Their fall began with lies, but our future was built on truth. Stephanie now stands as a powerful voice for change. She often joins me at conferences and public events, courageously sharing how she was manipulated and shedding light on the psychological tactics criminals use to exploit vulnerable individuals. Her transformation inspires others who've made devastating choices but still yearn to rebuild their lives. By bravely testifying against Diane and helping bring down that entire criminal web, she likely saved hundreds of families from suffering the same fate. The changes in our community have been nothing short of remarkable. After the truth came out, and the corruption was rooted out, home values jumped by 25%. But more meaningful than the financial recovery was the sense of unity we built. Where we were once just neighbors living under arbitrary rules, we became a real community bound by shared experience and mutual respect. We elected an entirely new HOA board committed to transparency and fairness, and we rewrote our community bylaws from the ground up. Real estate agents now highlight our neighborhood as a national model for ethical HOA governance. We've even started an annual Truth Day to mark the date Diane was arrested. It's both a celebration and a reminder to always question those in power when something feels wrong. Other communities now visit us to learn how to defend themselves from similar schemes. Angela Thompson, one of the co-conspirators, served 3 years of a 5-year sentence. She was released early for good behavior and has made genuine efforts to atone. She works a regular job, attends therapy, and has personally apologized to the families she hurt, those who were willing to meet with her. She now gives talks warning others about how easily desperation can lead people into criminal traps disguised as opportunity. The landmark ruling in Chen v. Hawthorne is now taught in law schools and cited in over 200 similar cases across the country. 15 states have since passed the HOA Accountability Act, a set of laws that demand greater transparency and offer stronger protections for property owners. Federal laws regarding fraud and domestic abuse have been revised, making it much harder for bad actors to manipulate the system meant to protect the vulnerable. And a dedicated federal task force has since arrested hundreds more and returned millions in stolen assets to victims. 2 years after the trial, I married the federal prosecutor who handled my case. What began as a professional connection grew into a bond built on deep understanding and respect. Today, we're expecting our first child. The cabin where I once felt betrayed and broken is now our family home, a place filled with laughter, healing, and new beginnings. I still work in software, but I've also dedicated part of my life to helping others. Together, we run a nonprofit that supports over 500 HOA abuse victims each year. The day I received the Presidential Medal for Community Service was surrealist, especially considering that not long ago, I was wrongly labeled a threat to my own neighborhood. But to me, the greatest honor isn't award, it's knowing that we've made lasting, systemic change that protects families nationwide. As for Diane, justice caught up with her. She's serving her time in a maximum security federal prison with no perks, no visitors, and no support. Her job cleaning bathrooms pays her 23 cents an hour. Even her fellow inmates keep their distance after learning what she did. Incredibly, she still claims to be innocent, painting herself as the victim of some government conspiracy. Just last week, I got a call from a federal contact. "Marcus, we've got another case in Texas," he said. "Another HOA scam, another group of families being targeted." Now, Stephanie, myself, and a team of agents travel to affected communities, educating people on how to detect and stop these abuses before it's too late. If this story opened your eyes to how easily authority can be misused, please like and share this video to spread awareness. Thanks for watching Timeless Walks. I'll see you in the next one, where we uncover another shocking truth. Until then, stay alert and stay strong.